My name is Sally Penni. I'm the founder of Women in the Law UK. Just a bit about Women in the Law UK. We have men as well. And the aim of our work is to support the next generation of lawyers. So I'm a barrister. I appear in court. I specialize in crime and employment and largely cybersecurity. So Rachel, who's a fantastic speaker, will be joining us in a minute. I can't see
you. I'm here, Sally.
Oh, right, there you are. You're very quietly sneaked upon me. I'm going to hand over to Rachel.
Thank you, Sally. Now, when you signed up for this event this evening, you will have all received an email saying you had to do a very specific task before the event. And I was very explicit in that email that if you did not all carry out this task, then this entire event isn't going to work. There wasn't really an email. But I bet me saying that there was made you feel uncomfortable and anxious and maybe like you were in trouble and maybe even like you'd let everybody down. And that's how people like me feel every day. So here's my presentation. I need to share my screen, Sally.
Oh, sorry. Just bear with me. Now I'm feeling uncomfortable. Sorry, I thought my PA did it already. Make host, co-host. Yep, super. And then I'll just make your spotlight your screen again. Super.
Can you all see that? Okay. Power of change, learning to live as a weirdo. I've brought my doll today. This is Rosebud. Can you still see me on the screen there? This is Rosebud. I took her on holiday with me when I was a kid, and I made her a passport because we were going to America to visit my grandparents, and I didn't know what went in a passport. So I wrote a list of her toys and her possessions. And I think the funny thing is about that is that a list of the things that you like, or the things that you own, actually tells you a lot more about yourself. It tells someone else a lot more about yourself than a number or where you're born or a picture of you doing this. So yeah, passports are one way that we identify ourselves, and the things that we own are another. This is one thing that I use to identify myself sometimes. It's a sunflower lanyard, and it shows I have hidden disabilities. So, my name is Rachel. This is my bio, and my company is Sparkle Class. I am a neurodiversity coach and consultant, and what that means is I work with and for neurodiverse people. So that's people with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and so on. And sometimes I work one-to-one coaching them. So if they're not sure about the next stage in their career, or they want to set up or grow their business, I help them do that. And I also go into companies and help them understand, embrace, and celebrate their neurodiverse staff. And sometimes people think, oh, well, why should I bother doing that? Why should I take steps to include people like me? And if you don't care about anything else, there's quite a lot of evidence to show that we're 30 to 50% more productive. So that's a good reason. So I'm telling you my story today. I'm going to be talking about how I went from being a confused youngster to a depressed adult to where I am today. And I never told my story before I started doing this talk. So why am I telling you now? Well, I'm going to come back to that near the end. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my conditions. One of them is autism. Now, everybody thinks that the autistic spectrum looks something like this. So you've got normal at one end, you've got a bit autistic in the middle, and over there you've got Rain Man. When the film Rain Man came out, that was actually the first time I'd heard the word autistic. But I didn't think that I was autistic because I was nothing like Dustin Hoffman's character. Did you know he won an Oscar for that? And I thought that was a bit of a swizz because, he didn't have that many lines. And to play a stereotypical autistic, you only need one facial expression. So that's maybe something for Nicole Kidman to think about for her next. Autistic spectrum looks a lot more like this. It's a lot more colourful. And some of the things you might find on the spectrum, good at maths is very common, obsessive interest, crap social skills, weird about being touched, non-verbal. So we've got some other things coming in there. Obsessive interest has suddenly sort of drifted away, and ADHD has come in and messed it up. And I have ADHD, as I mentioned. And so although I'm good at maths, you can't really tell because I can't concentrate on the numbers. So people cover up crap social skills by pretending everything is fine. Non-verbal, that can manifest itself as being by choice or not by choice. Oh, obsessive interest, that suddenly got bigger there. I personally like Hello Kitty, but it's not an obsessive interest in my case. So that exists outside the spectrum for me. Gastrointestinal issues can be the cause of some of that rigid thinking or rigid behaviour. Or it could be nothing to do with that and just be a coexisting condition. About 95% of autistics have at least one coexisting condition. Depression quite often runs through the spectrum for a lot of people, and ADHD leads to depression as well. And depression can be the cause of some of those gastrointestinal issues. And of course, being depressed means you need to be touched, but of course you're weird about being touched unless it's someone on a very specific list that only makes sense to you. And anxieties come in there, it's the font is wrong and the wrong colour for some reason. That leads to coping strategies, and depression leads to coping strategies. ADHD leads to coping strategies. And suddenly pretending everything is fine isn't really working anymore, so you start drinking, and that leads to more depression. And there's a completely irrelevant banana. So you can see, there's a lot going on, and it makes it hard to diagnose, not just autism, but anything at all. What about ADHD? Now, ADHD isn't just taking your shirt off and sitting slumped in front of the telly for hours on end, although if that's what you enjoy doing, I'm not going to judge you. ADHD is like having all those TV screens on at once. And one of them might be tuned to a radio station that happens to be playing Baby Shark on repeat. Another one will be asking you questions like how many different types of penguin are there. Another one will be trying to tell you the things that you're supposed to remember. And then another one will be listing all your failures from 1999 until the present day. It's really hard, as you could probably imagine, to try and tune in on one of those TVs when there's so much else going on. It is possible, if one of those TVs is something that you're really interested in, it's possible for a person with ADHD to hyper-focus and to tune out everything else. But unless that's something of vital importance, it feels like there's always a lot of noise going on, and you can't always see it, but it's going on inside. So, my story. These are some things that people said to me when I was at school, when I was a kid. So Weirdo was obviously the first one. Funny thing is, I never, even though people called me that, I never really realised I was different from other people. I thought everybody thought the same way that I did. Sorry, I'm on someone else's computer. I'm not really used to the mouse. So Weirdo was one. Clever. I'm academically gifted, and in some ways that's a good thing because it meant I could cope with, you know, having ADHD a lot, but it allowed me to fly under the radar, which meant I never got diagnosed. You know, I could manage my schoolwork and so on, so people didn't think there was anything wrong. Lazy, that's very common in people with ADHD. Too sensitive. I quite like this because saying somebody's too sensitive implies there's an appropriate amount of sensitivity that you can have, which of course isn't true. And I was also called insensitive. I don't know how you can be too sensitive and insensitive at the same time, but there you go. Must try harder. Okay, but no one told me how to. Tortoise trimmer. I had a teacher who encouraged everybody in the class to give each other rather cruel nicknames. And mine was tortoise trimmer because although I was clever, it would take me ages to do anything because I put it off with. That's what people with ADHD, it would take me ages to get started on something. And I sat next to can't do it crooks, And Can't Do It Crooks ended up in prison for GBH, so it turned out there was something he could do after all. So, like a lot of autistic of all kids who get bullied is around about 20%, and the percentage of autistic kids who get bullied is about 75%. So it's obviously a lot higher. I actually looked up how many ADHD kids get bullied, and it is more than normal kids. But one interesting thing is that ADHD kids are more likely to be the bully as well. I just want to touch on the difference between neurodiversity and mental illness, because I know that some people aren't quite clear on the difference. A neurodiverse condition is something that you're born with. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and that means it's a little bit like having a toddler brain. And people don't like to say this, but it's true. There's a part of your brain that, for whatever reason, doesn't develop beyond a certain point. That's me, by the way, in the picture. I'm dressed as Iggle Piggle. And that's to illustrate that it's, you know, it's something that stops at a certain point. And mental illness is different because it's something that's acquired, and it varies as well. So conditions like ADHD and autism, they can manifest themselves differently. They feel different on different days. So they can look different, but they're there all the time. And mental illness actually fluctuates, and of course it can go away. So I'm going to show you with this handy little graph of my own neurodiverse conditions and mental health. So there's my ADHD. It might look worse on some days, it might appear worse or better on some days, but it's basically there all the time. Same with autism. Some days I feel really autistic, other days not so much, but again, there all the time. That's how mental I am. So that's gone up and down throughout my life, very different from the neurodiverse conditions. And there's another factor that affects all this as well, and that's all the other crap I've got going on in my life. So again, like you, that, you know, what you've got going on is going to affect how you feel and how you behave. So I'd like to talk a bit about my mental health now. I was depressed from the age of 6. And when I was 14, I was diagnosed and put into a mental hospital. And you know what? It wasn't actually that bad. It wasn't as bad as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a picture I've got here. It was obviously full of crazy people. You're not meant to call them that, are you? Sorry. It was full of psychiatrists. But apart from them, it was actually all right. And the other kids were fine. And I learned how to set fire to stuff. So, life skills. But I joke about it, but it's obviously really serious, because autistic people are 9 times more likely to die by suicide, and they are 28 times more likely to attempt it. So, the whole mental illness thing in terms of neurodiversity, it is something that's pretty serious and pretty important. That's me a few months ago in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And although it doesn't look like it, I'm on a stag do. I'm the best woman at an upcoming wedding. That man with me is Chris. He's the groom. Chris and I met through a theatre group. That's a picture of us when we took the production of Bouncers to the Edinburgh Festival. I'm in the middle there. I was a crew, all of it. And you can see Chris over there on the left. Chris and I joined the drama group at around about the same time. And we very heavily got involved in pretty much everything we could. He would act in every play, and I was normally stage managing or assistant stage manager, and I'd be painting the sets and so on. And we helped with the publicity. We go around Leeds city centre on a Saturday giving out flyers to get people to come to our plays. And the two of us also joined the committee fairly early on as well. So we were pretty heavily involved, right from the start. And when we'd been there for about a year, it was time for the group's Christmas party. Now, it was quite a big group. So if you had Christmas cards for people, you wouldn't bring them for everybody because it was too many people. So you would just bring them for your friends in the group, or somebody you've been in a lot of plays with, or maybe somebody who'd done you a favour, perhaps. And because it was a big party, to save you actually handing the cards out to everyone, they had a table at the entrance to the bar, and you would go in with your cards, and everybody had a pile card out on each person's pile, and then that person could pick all their cards up and take them home at the end of the night. So I rocked up with my pile of cards and I started giving them out, and I saw Chris's pile, so I put my card for him on there. And as I was doing this, my friend came up next to me and started doing the same thing. And she got to a card that she had for me. And she said to me, "Where's your pile?" And I looked at the table and I said, "I haven't got a pile." I sort of tried to justify it to myself, you know, like you do, and to say to myself, well, maybe I hadn't been in the group long enough, but I knew that wasn't true because I'd actually been in longer than Chris, and he had a pile. And I tried to say to myself, well, maybe it's because I haven't been involved in enough stuff, and I knew that wasn't true either because I'd been involved in pretty much everything. Such a little thing, isn't it? A Christmas card. And yet, when we don't get one, it feels so much bigger. And I know everybody's had that experience. I know you've all had that experience where you felt left out or excluded, or you've not been invited to something. You know, everybody has that. But when you're autistic, it's the sort of thing that happens over and over and over again. Back to my story. I travelled the world. I had various jobs, and I saw lots and lots of mental health professionals, most of whom were not particularly helpful. Most of them weren't helpful at all, in fact. And I went to Australia when I travelled the world, and that man with me, you can see in front of the front of the Sydney Harbour Bridge there, he flew out to Australia to take me to the Sydney Opera House on my birthday. So I married him and had his children, not at the Sydney Opera House, it was later on. And also, when I was 30, I set up my own business. I thought I was going to be very cool and have this massive office with a lot of glass, but I was actually just a fat nutter in a cupboard under the stairs. And there are lots of reasons why having your own business is really good for an entrepreneur, and for somebody mentally ill, in fact, because you have a lot of flexibility. You've got a lot of autonomy, and neurodiverse entrepreneurs are often very innovative. We're good at problem solving, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, we're much more productive than normal people, and we learn faster as well. But there was a conflict, because while I had the skills to be an entrepreneur, I couldn't do it the same way that everybody else was doing it. I was trying to take advice from normal people, from neurotypical people, and try and copy the way that normal people work, and it just wasn't working. And at this time, I got very, very seriously mentally ill. I didn't know how to cope with anything that was going on because I didn't have the tools. It's like trying to open a box when the crowbar is still inside. And I didn't get any help at the time either because I was too scared. And I wasn't treating myself the way I needed to be treated because I didn't know how to. And other people weren't treating me the way I needed to be treated either. How should you treat autistics? Let's have a look. 1, fairly obvious, don't make eye contact. Number 2, do not touch them. 3, we've seen some have gastrointestinal issues, so don't offer food. Number 4, if you see one, stand still until it moves away. And then finally, tell a park ranger. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong slide. That's not how to treat autistics. That's how to treat bears. Seriously though, how to treat autistics, just, with treating us with respect would be a good start. And I find that some of the people who are supposed to be on on our side. Some even neurodiverse professionals are actually surprisingly bad at this. I was looking at a thing about an autism conference, and it had a list of the speakers, and one of the speakers was autistic, and his write-up thing managed to, get a degree, and he's a public speaker, he travels independently. And I was thinking, well, of course he travels independently. He's autistic. He's probably memorized the train map of Great Britain. So yeah, treating us as with respect and not being patronizing is a great start. Anyway, back to my story. So I was waiting for my diagnosis, my ADHD diagnosis and my autism. And because I'm female, there's women tend to go undiagnosed. We're better at masking, we're better at fitting in, we tend to have better social skills. And do you want to hear my own personal theory on why one reason that women are underdiagnosed? I think one reason is because women who are neurodiverse aren't a problem for other people. So if you have an autistic male, his special interests are often the sorts of things that have, fine if you want to do that, but don't actually do a lot for other people. So it might, the classic is train spotting, isn't it? Or it might be tinkering with a car, or it might be collecting action figures or something. Whereas my special autistic interest is cooking. In fact, this picture is a cake that I made for my kids last Christmas. And literally nobody has ever said to me, please stop making food. Stop baking me tasty cakes. Stop feeding me. And the same goes for things like knitting as well, isn't it? There's no such thing as too much knitting. Nobody says stop making little cardigans for the special care baby unit. So my theory is that women's special interests are productive and therefore not seen as a problem. So that's a graphic of what my road to ADHD diagnosis was like. It didn't really go anywhere. I kept trying and I was brushed off. And I eventually was identified by an ADHD coach, and she managed to, excuse me, she identified my ADHD in the first session. Sorry, I've got a bit of hay fever. So, yeah, I never got the official medical diagnosis, but because I had a coach diagnosis, I diagnosed me, I was sort of fine with that. And when it came to autism, my last therapist, who I was seeing about a year ago, he has referred me to the proper diagnosis people. I don't know what you get when you get diagnosed. I'm assuming it's a certificate or maybe a medal or something like that. And he said there's no doubt in his mind that I am autistic, so I don't need a diagnosis for myself, but it's handy to compel other people to treat me in the way that I need to be treated. The issue with diagnosis is something that people ask me about often at the end of my talks, because especially older people, they say, well, I think I might have this, and I don't know whether to get a diagnosis. And honestly, it's a really personal choice, because you may not need it, but for a lot of people, a diagnosis is a relief, because it enables them to get rid of some of those labels that they've put on themselves, some of that identity that they feel doesn't really fit. And it lets them say to themselves, I'm not lazy, or I'm not self-indulgent, I'm not unlikable, and maybe most importantly, I'm not broken. This is a still from Monty Python's Four Yorkshiremen sketch, where they're all trying to outdo each other with how deprived their childhoods were. And I'm going to be totally honest with you here. I do get a little bit Four Yorkshiremen about the whole late diagnosis thing, because people will say, oh, I got diagnosed really late, I was 28, and I'd be like, oh, I used to dream of being diagnosed in my 20s. And there's that whole mental health top trump thing as well, isn't there, where I met this guy who said his last bout of depression had lasted 6 months and mine had lasted 3 years. So I was like, oh, I win. And of course I don't win, do I? Nobody wins. And so I do have to remind myself that sort of attitude, it's not a competition, and it doesn't help me, and it certainly doesn't help you. So what can you do to help your favourite neurodivergent? Well, I talked about treating us with respect, but I'd also say go further than that. Challenge us, celebrate us, use us, not in the same way that my useless ex-boyfriend used me, but, ask us to do something that we're good at. And I know that, a lot of people I see say they don't really feel they're good at anything. And I know that's not true. I used to teach underprivileged kids in New York, where I did it, and then I did it again in Leeds. And some of the kids I worked with were, to be honest, a pain in the bum, and others were thick as thistles. But each kid brought something to my classes that none of the other kids could. And, something positive as well. And the same goes for you too, not the thick as thistles bit. Each of you is capable of bringing something unique and something valuable to wherever you're going and whatever you're doing. And one way we can find what we're good at is by taking some of those messages that we've got, those labels that people have pushed on us, and turning them on their heads. So if somebody says you've got your head in the clouds, or you're a dreamer, that means you're imaginative and you're creative. Or if someone says you're boring, suddenly that's a good thing when they need help with their tax return. So it's about understanding what you're good at and taking those things and seeing the positives in them. I told you at the beginning of this that I was going to tell you why I'm telling you my story now. And it is because of these three individuals. So the first is my therapist, represented here by Sigmund Freud. He didn't actually look like that. He looked a bit more like Anthony Hopkins, actually, not the evil kind that, in his more benign roles. My therapist told me to open up, to start trusting people, to start connecting with people and starting to talk about my experiences and my mental health. And he didn't mean do it to a bunch of strangers, but here we are. And this is where the plot twist comes in. I actually got better. I'm no longer depressed and I'm no longer anxious. My life absolutely is not like that at all. I still worry about things. I still get stressed. I still get anxious. And, like you, I've got a lot going on, and there are things inside and outside that stress me, and there's still the legacy, but I'm not depressed. And also when stuff happens, I can cope now. And for the first time, if I need to, I'll reach out for help. This is a second person. It's a stranger. It was actually a stranger who suggested that I put this talk together. It wasn't some bloke I met at the bus stop. It was actually somebody I met at a public speaking workshop. And I think all of us have had that experience where it's been a stranger who's had a really great suggestion or some kind of insight into us that the people who know us haven't had. And I think that's because they don't have those preconceptions about us. They don't see those labels or that identity that other people have created for us. And so that's the second person. And the third person, who is the reason I'm telling you my story, is you. You are represented here by Gillian Anderson because I am assuming that you are that beautiful and also that cool. And the reason I am doing this is because I want to be a page in someone else's survival guide. I could have done with somebody telling me this stuff 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I find now that I use my experience, I use all the tools and techniques I've developed to get through every day and every week. And I use them in my coaching work, particularly to help other people. And for me, that's incredibly rewarding, not just because I'm able to help people, but also it feels like, all that experience wasn't wasted. I'm able to use all of that to bring some good to somebody else. So learning to sort of live without being mentally ill was surprisingly challenging, actually. And we talk about, when we're making these changes, we talk about going outside our comfort zone. We think of our comfort zone, the boundaries of our comfort zone, as being like a fence with a pointy top, like in this picture. So going outside of our comfort zone feels like we've got to go over it. It's a big step. It might hurt. We might rip our trousers. And it's, that can be quite scary. But in actual fact, the edges of our comfort zone look more like the safety barriers you get at an event. Those metal ones that make an annoying clanking sound when you move them. But the thing is, you can move them. You don't have to go over the boundaries of your comfort zone. You can just start shifting it very gently. Start doing a few things that feel new, that feel different, that feel exciting, and gradually expand the boundaries of your comfort zone. So when I was getting better from my mental illnesses, I said to my therapist, I don't really know how to live because I'd never lived like that before. And he said, one way you can do that is to work out what your values are and then try to live according to those. And that's what I try to do now. So I know that I'm never going to be normal, but I can be authentic. So in closing, I'm showing you some of the words that people have said about me, some of the labels that people have put on me. And I know that labels can be useful. They can be, they're a shortcut. They could be, they help us categorize, they help us understand people. But the best thing about labels is you can take them off. Thank you very much.
Wow. Right. So let's do a round of applause. And thank you for being so open with us, really. Can we do our virtual clap, please? That was really fantastic.